Let us pray. In our mind's eye, let us see the awesome grandeur of the Rockies, the denseness of our forests, the fertility of our farmland, the splendor of our rivers, the richness of all our resources. Then, O Lord, let us rededicate ourselves as wise stewards of such bounty on behalf of all Albertans. Amen.
Introduction of visitors.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased today to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly some distinguished visitors seated in your gallery. Mr. Speaker, it is with some sadness that I do so because it is a farewell introduction to this Assembly of a visitor who has been in Alberta on a number of occasions and who is just completing his responsibilities as the High Commissioner from the United Kingdom to Canada. And today, Sir Derek Day is accompanied by his wife, Lady Day. And if I may, sir, introduce as well his charming daughter, Kate, who is also visiting our province for the first time. They are accompanied in the gallery by Mr. and Mrs. John Doble. John Doble, of course, is the Consul General of Britain, and I would ask that honourable members welcome to this Assembly and bid farewell on this formal farewell occasion to Sir Derek and Lady Day.
Presenting petitions.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to present the following petition that has been received for a private bill. The petition of Jimmy W. Chow for the Jimmy W. Chow Bar Admission Act.
Having heard the request from the Honourable Member from Durham-Heller for concurrence in the recommendation of the Standing Committee for Private Bills, not that one. Good day to go straight. Is there concurrence from the Assembly? Thank you.
Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Private Bills has had the following bills under consideration and recommends that they be proceeded with. Bill PR 6, the Alberta Wheat Pool Amendment Act 1987, Bill PR 8, Edmonton Economic Development Authority Amendment Act 1987. Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Private Bills has further had the following bills under consideration and recommends that they be proceeded with certain amendments. Bill PR 15, Lake Bonavista Homeowners Association Limited Tax Exemption Act. Bill PR 16, Parkland Community Centre Calgary Limited Tax Exemption Act. Bill PR 17, Lake Bonaventure Residents Association Limited Tax Exemption Act. Bill PR 18, Midnapore Lake Residents Association Limited Tax Amendment Act. Bill PR 20, Institute of Canadian Indian Arts Act. Bill PR 23, Federal Canadian Trust and Bond Corporation Act. Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Private Bills has further had the following bills under consideration and recommends that they not be proceeded with. Bill PR 9, Edmonton Convention and Tourism Authority Amendment Act 1987. Bill PR 12, German Canadian Cultural Association Edmonton Act. I request the concurrence of the Assembly in these recommendations.
This time. Having heard the request from the Honourable Member from Durham-Heller for concurrence in the recommendations of the Standing Committee on Private Bills, does the Assembly agree with the request? Opposed? Carried.
Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce today Bill number 272, an act to amend the Public Highways Development Act. The purpose of this bill, Mr. Speaker, is to stop the nuisance of curbing, that is the illegal act of selling vehicles without license on public streets, which becomes a nuisance to the people in the neighborhoods.
The honourable member for Edmonton Highlands has moved first reading of Bill 272, an act to amend the Public Highways Development Act. All those willing to give consent to first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill 272, being an act to amend the Public Highways Development Act, introduced by Honourable Member Ms. Barrett, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests.
Premier, followed by the member for Innisfail.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to introduce today to you and through you to the members of the Assembly some 46 students, grade 6 students from the Keowin School in Edmonton Whitemud. They are accompanied by 2 teachers, Mr. Hanley and Mr. Tranter. They are in the members gallery, and I'd ask that they stand and be recognized by the Assembly.
Innisfail.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly 33 grade 5 students from the Spruce View Elementary School in the constituency of Innisfail. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mrs. Marguerite Baker, and 6 parents, Mrs. Jody Anderson, Mrs. Sandy Burst, Mrs. Linda Dutton, Mrs. Joyce Johansson, Mr. Dan Larson, and Mr. Brian Henschel. They are seated in the public gallery, and would ask them to rise and receive the welcome of the House.
Member for Dunvegan.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce to you and through you 16 grade 7 and 8 students from the Woking School in the wonderful constituency of Dunvegan. They are accompanied by 2 teachers, Mr. Jim Gurnett and Mr. Keith Tomelty, and 1 chaperone, Mrs. Ann Tomelty. I'm sure that most of you know that Jim is a former New Democrat member for Dunvegan. They are seated in the public gallery, and I would ask them to rise and give them the usual welcome of the Assembly.
Member for Stony Plain, followed by the Minister of Technology, Research, Telecommunications. What have I got? Calgary.
Paul. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to take this opportunity today to introduce a hard-working young gentleman who's a member of the Marlborough community in the great constituency of Calgary-McCall. He's traveled to Edmonton to watch the action of the legislature. I would ask Duncan Murray if he would rise and receive the cordial welcome of the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly 16 students from grade 6 Glendale School with their teacher, Mrs. Wisher, and parents, Mrs. Lucas and Mrs. Nielsen. I would ask them to rise and be accorded a warm welcome by the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to direct the first question to the Minister of Hospitals and Medicare. Mr. Speaker, the annual reports tabled by the Minister yesterday indicate that the Conservative government has once again succeeded in making a number of physicians very wealthy. And I don't doubt that the medical profession must be grateful to this minister who has boosted the average doctor's income in excess of $150,000 a year. And the minister, I'm said, told the news media that he knows personally of one doctor who received between $600,000 and $700,000. Mr. Speaker, rather than deal with this problem, the minister has launched an unwarranted attack on the patients of other healthcare professionals, namely physiotherapy, chiropractic, and optometry. My question to the minister, does the minister fail to appreciate that the figures that he tabled in this legislature yesterday are the clearest indication yet that he has brought in the wrong solution to the wrong problem.
Mr. Speaker, once again, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition has failed to read the entire report. The statistical supplement that was tabled yesterday, which includes the information the Honourable Leader is referring to, notes on page 9 that the statistics in the following tables cannot be used as an accurate measure of a full-time practitioner's income, and it gives a number of reasons why. And it would have been useful for the Honourable Leader to have reviewed that and then to have looked at the statistics themselves, wherein it's indicated that some 17 different medical practitioners have received some $95 million in payments. In fact, 16 of those are for laboratories that employ any number of people. There's upwards of 30 or 40 people working in some of those labs. The system as well is that whoever the owner of the laboratory is, the medical doctor in most cases, bills the health care plan in that individual's name. In addition to that, the Honourable Leader should be aware that the one ophthalmologist who has billed something like $1.28 million to the plan is the Gimbel Eye Clinic in Calgary, which is world-renowned for its services and in fact employs more than 50 people. So if the Honourable Leader had taken the opportunity, as many did yesterday and today, to not only read the report but inquire as to the real meanings there, he would have learned that there are, in fact, reasons why those payments show up as large as they do.
Mr. Speaker, I was going by the minister's own books. I didn't think he'd table inaccurate information, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
But my question, to follow up on this a little more specifically, Mr. Speaker, then, I noticed that the doctors billed the plan for roughly $550 million, and the other specialties I'm talking about, $67 million in total. If this minister is serious about rising costs, why didn't he concentrate on the $550 million rather than the $67 million?
That's right.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we did. We took a number of approaches to trying to curtail the rising costs of health care services. Members will recall during the estimates and at other times I indicated that the actual amount expended for basic health services paid to all practitioners last year was $694 million. We budgeted the same in 1987-88, and we took a number of initiatives that I announced 3 weeks ago yesterday to try to curtail that increase. With respect to medical practitioners, we've been involved as well in discussions about limiting the number of medical doctors that might be able to bill a health care insurance plan. We've been involved in discussions about limiting laboratory tests and other kinds of tests that are very costly. We've been involved in a number of discussions involving our citizens signing the bill when they go to the doctor's office so that they and the medical profession have a better idea of what costs are. Unfortunately, the Canada Health Act prevents us from levying any kind of a user fee on visits to medical doctors' offices, and it also prevents the doctor from billing anything to the patient directly. So medical doctors are stuck in this problem with the Canada Health Act where they can't bill the patient directly. We can't apply any kind of a deterrent fee there at all. The situation is quite different with respect to the other professions like optometrists, physiotherapists, chiropractors, podiatrists, dentists for that portion of their work that's done outside of the hospital system in terms of surgery. They are able to bill the patient some amount directly, and we've taken that approach with them. On balance, I think we've taken an extremely fair approach across the board, and the changes we've made hopefully will result in a balanced budget this year.
Supplementary question is typical Conservatives. The only thing they can think of in cutting back fees is deterrent fees. Mr. Speaker, they're missing the whole point.
Right.
Let's look at the labs, for example. I notice they're up by 15% to a level of $2.2 million each, some $82 million. Now, I wonder if the minister could be a little more specific. Other than setting up a utilization committee and discussions, what measures, concrete measures, has the minister taken to curb these private laboratories that have risen up to $82 million? And I point out this is a lot more money than contraceptive counseling, which is a preventive measure.
The private laboratories do not perform the tests unless they're ordered by a medical doctor. And the situation, quite frankly, is that I believe that the private labs are able to provide those tests equally well, if not better, than the labs which exist in our hospital system. So the problem isn't one of getting rid of the private sector, as the NDP would want to do in this province, but rather one of finding out how we can utilize these testing procedures differently and hopefully cut down on the increase in the number of tests that occur. And we're working with the Utilization Committee involving staff of my department, the Alberta Medical Association, and hopefully the College of Physicians and Surgeons and Alberta Hospital Association to see what can be done in that area. But I just conclude, Mr. Speaker, by saying our objective is not to throw out the private sector.
Mr. Speaker, that's very generous of you. I'm sure they appreciate it. The point is the doctors are giving sign it to their own labs. That's part of the problem. Sure, even this minister must be aware of that. My question is, I know the medical doctor over there is getting excited, but Mr. Speaker, I'll deal with the minister. My question is to look at the other, the minister's annual report shows that just over $9 million was paid last year with optometric services. And that was out of a total budget of $750 million. I notice that's 1.2% of the cost. That's what we tag. And I asked the minister, why did he pick this rather insignificant cost to cut instead of dealing with the real problems of rising costs, dealing with the whole fee-for-service problem? I notice that that's gone up $53 million, an increase of 9.5%.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we did in fact address the problems of optometric care, I think in a very responsible way. First of all, the optometrists have been saying for some length of time they wanted parity with ophthalmologists in terms of the amount paid by the health care insurance plan for a basic eye examination. So we did move that from $24.75, I believe it was, to $31 and something, and effective August 1st. And then we looked at how we could save funds in that area and decided that children should continue to have full coverage by the health care insurance plan up to the age of 18, and that seniors should be covered as well. And we felt that those people in between, which wouldn't be more than 2 people in each family at the most, would be able to pay $31 a year or every 2 years, whatever the case may be, for an eye examination. We didn't think that was an unwarranted expectation to make of people for their eye care. And I'm confident that the optometrists in this province will be as busy as they ever were after August 1st, because I think most people, in fact, many people, when they go to an optometrist and come home with a bill for $200 and perhaps more for eyeglasses and frames, don't even know that the cost of the actual eye exam was paid for by the Alberta Health Care Insurance Plan. So I expect that there will be adequate opportunities for optometrists to deliver eye care under the new schedule of benefits, and as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Speaker, it's entirely fair to everyone.
Supplementary, Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, Albertans are of necessity concerned when they read about the income levels in the morning paper. To the Minister, do we have an automatic review mechanism of doctors' billing that kicks in at a certain level? And if we don't, why don't we?
The answer, Mr. Speaker, is yes, we do.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate the second question to the member for Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, as 1 in every 10 or 1 million Canadian women are battered by male partners, according to a report released today, this means that 55,000 Alberta women are similarly assaulted. This, Mr. Speaker, is a social problem that must be addressed by a number of government departments, as recommended in the 1984 Federal Provincial Territorial Report on Wife Battering. As this report made a point of recommending that the Alberta government maintain adequate funding for assaulted women and their children, how is it that inadequate funding levels are forcing 2 Calgary battered women's shelters to close 10 of 32 much-needed beds?
Well, Mr. Speaker, funding has not been reduced for the Calgary shelters.
Nevertheless, it is inadequate because women are turned away on a constant basis. As the Minister of Social Services apparently does not recognize the extent and the seriousness of the problem and will not extend adequate funding to women's shelters. Will the Premier advise the Minister to review the current situation and ensure that adequate allowances are made to these shelters?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the Minister of Social Services will want to deal with the matter when she returns to the House.
It's irresponsible of everyone in this government. As the report prepared for ministers responsible for the status of women also recommended a media campaign similar to AIDAC's to convey society's abhorrence of this crime, when is this government going to put in place a campaign?
Mr. Speaker, again, I'm sure the Minister of Social Services will want to deal with that when she returns to the House.
To the Premier again, as further recommendations of this report indicate the need for data to determine the extent and exact nature of this problem, as well as for the need for more outreach and support programs, for example, through community health nurses, will the Premier ensure that the government will implement these recommendations?
Mr. Speaker, in every society, and Alberta is not different, there are problems that we all face and struggle with, the problems that frustrate us all, the problems of poor, hungry, drugs, the problem of battered wives, abused children. All of those problems are not unique to Alberta. We certainly have them here. What we try to do is do everything possible to solve those problems and help people. That's what our government is doing. Now, it's certain that any member can focus on any one of these things at any time, and I suppose get a certain amount of recognition for having done it. Nevertheless, what the government is doing is trying to deal with these matters that are matters worldwide in society in every way we possibly can. We have been doing that. We will do it in the future.
Red Deer North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Attorney General, can the Attorney General tell us that given the fact that this report clearly states that battery also includes women who are insulted by their husbands and women whose husbands don't give them enough spending money, could the Attorney General tell us what would be the actual numbers of women in this province who are physically battered by their husbands?
Mr. Speaker, it's difficult to gauge exactly the number of women who are the subject of abuse that would constitute criminal abuse, such as assault and battery. It's compounded as well, Mr. Speaker, by the fact, the difficulty is compounded as well, Mr. Speaker, by the fact that in many cases, after complaints have been laid, the spouses do not wish to continue with the action and that request that charges not be laid or that they be withdrawn. In recognition of this serious concern, it has been the policy of the law enforcement agencies to continue to proceed with the charges despite the fact that spouses often, as I say, wish to have charges withdrawn. It's a very difficult issue, and I know I've had discussions with the members of the Assembly, including the member for Avonmore, who initiated this series of questions about the concerns that the law enforcement agencies and the courts have relative to this serious problem. I cannot give any hard statistics on the number of women who are, or men for that matter, spouses, let me put it in that way, who are assaulted by the other spouse. But whenever those cases come to the attention of law enforcement agencies, they are instructed to proceed when possible to do so. And of course, I could obtain the statistics on the number of cases that are in fact carried through, but I don't have those at my fingertips. But I must say, Mr. Speaker, the government views with great concern violence towards individual citizens of this province, no matter how that violence originates, in the home or in the streets or otherwise, and we want to do what we can as a government to prevent it from happening and to cure those people who are involved in those acts when they do occur.
Is it Westlock Sturgeon or Calgary Buffalo on this supplementary? Calgary Buffalo?
To the Premier, can the Premier explain why the government is sitting with millions and millions of dollars of unallocated lottery funds and is prepared to allow 20 beds for the most needy women and children in our community to close for the lack of $200,000?
Mr. Speaker, the council in charge of sheltered homes has been allocating the money. The government has given them as much money as it gave them last year, which was enough to do the job. They have been allocating the money, not the government.
Main question, Westlock Sturgeon.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct this question to the Premier. It's with respect to the Husky upgrader. I share the concern of most Albertans with regard to the fate of this upgrader, but I'm hopeful it'll go ahead, but I don't want to see a deal made just to make a deal, and that it has to make good economic sense. It also concerns me, Mr. Speaker, that the company in question, Husky Oil, has a large foreign ownership and has been very close ties, along with its parent company, Nova, not only with this government but with the Premier in the past. Now, Mr. Speaker, could the Premier tell the House whether the guarantees provided Husky for the upgrader could be used by other groups willing to go ahead with their own upgrader? Would he make the same offer to other groups?
Mr. Speaker, we never made an offer to anybody. We were approached by Husky, and Husky was asked under certain conditions for support that would allow them to go ahead. And we, as a province, did come up with support, entered into an agreement to have it go ahead, and that was a matter that the federal government did not feel they could proceed with. Now we are exploring additional ways to see if the Husky upgrader can proceed. I wonder, Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member wants to be specific in terms of any ties I might have with Husky.
In fact, honourable member, there'll be no more comments about that. Order, please. Because the Premier filed statement of claim as all statement of holdings as all members of the Cabinet have done, and therefore no more comments along that line.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. I mean, this is a point of fact. Would you take it down? This is a point of fact. We'll take it up later.
At the end of question period?
I think you're completely out of order. Mr. Speaker.
Order. Perhaps a supplementary question.
Supplementary question is what I'm proceeding for. In view of the comments he just said, Mr. Speaker, the Husky upgrader, it should be any upgrader, but in view of the comments of the throne speech as follows, and I'll read it, Mr. Speaker. My government invites all those who have interest in potential oil sands and heavy oil projects to bring specific proposals forward for the consideration. Now, has the government received proposals to develop a heavy oil upgrade in the province from any other groups or companies in view of this request?
Mr. Speaker, there may have been something that I'm not familiar with to the Minister of Energy very recently, but up until my current knowledge on it, there have been none.
My big concern is that other companies won't be allowed the opportunity to obtain a deal similar to which Husky may get. But in light of this, will the Premier assure the House that the details of any offer made to Husky will be made public and will be debated in the House before any formal signing of an agreement will take place?
Mr. Speaker, the government is elected to make decisions, represent the people of Alberta. We will do that.
Well, this seems to be in keeping, whether it's the doctors for $600 million, whether it's signing a new constitution, or whether it's giving your friends a new upgrader. It's all supposed to be railroaded through. Now, has the government considered the construction of an upgrader which would be cooperatively owned by the heavy oil producers in a manner similar as, you know, we do with gas plants, which is run on a basis of cost basis and on a cooperative basis?
If the honourable member is trying to describe a utility type of upgrader, Mr. Speaker, that has been considered.
Calgary Forest Long.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. To the Premier, has the government then given any consideration to equity participation by the province of Alberta to make sure that that upgrader project goes ahead?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure in the course of the various discussions with Husky that option has been discussed, yes.
Leader of the Representative Party, followed by the member for Red Deer South.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. The government has indicated to the Athabasca small power producers, potential producers, that they should make a mini application. Has the Premier assured himself that the cost of that mini application is within the means of those persons that will present the application?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm assured of that by the Minister of Transportation and Utilities, who may wish to add to that answer.
I'd be delighted to, Mr. Speaker. In a meeting that occurred within the last 3 to 4 weeks, we had a number of the farmers who were involved in the END project. We had the proponents of the project itself. We had their lawyers, a member of the ERCB who explained the process, and the use of what they call the 5-page application, which is a shortened application. And my understanding as recently as 2 days ago was that their lawyer is working on an application with the ERCB.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Minister or either the Premier. In terms of the principle of price for power produced by small power producers, and in this case the Athabasca Group, is it the principle of government that the price paid to the small power producers would be the same price as that paid to the larger producers in the province of Alberta? Or is it the policy of the government that the price paid between the large producers and small producers would have a difference?
Mr. Speaker, if you recall, not too long ago, we indicated that there would be a public inquiry that would be a joint hearing between the PUB and the ERCB, and that all proponents of the small power, which incidentally we support, would have the opportunity to appear before the joint committee to allow them to make some recommendations to us as to what would be defined as a small power producer, what would be defined as the amount of power that could be allocated to, say, a plant, whether it's 25 megawatts, 30 megawatts, or the likes of that, what would be the prices that could be considered for something along that line. One of the questions that was raised by the proponent was a request to have the same price as the Genesee plant, and at that particular point I suggested that that would mean the possibility of waiting until the PUB hears their application for their rate sometime in, I believe it's 1989.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, could the Minister indicate what steps will be taken in terms of expediting this application once it's presented, in terms of the need for the jobs in the area and the need for economic development being somewhat of a rush at the present time?
I can appreciate that last particular point, Mr. Speaker, but I think at this particular stage it's in the hands of the developers or the proponents of the Southview project. They're the ones who are, at this particular point in time, very, very much interested in the project, are prepared to put the dollars into the project and to get it going. And we have opened basically all the doors that I'm aware of to allow that to begin to happen, even to the point of the last 2 meetings that were called by me to, in fact, try and see if we could expedite a little faster.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, is on the same matter, but to the Premier, because I think it's his donkey that was being beaten on this case. Could they, in view of the fact that we're shoving this group into public hearings when the Premier won't even give Meech Lake public hearings, would the Premier go so far as to pay for the costs of the public hearings? Because this is a small group fighting some of the biggest, mightiest, wealthiest companies in this province who will be stopping it.
As a matter of fact, I can respond in part to that. The Small Power Producers Association of the province of Alberta will be making a representation on behalf of all the small power producers, and we're working with them right now on a budget that they are preparing to allow us to meet a commitment that we'd made some 3 or 4 years ago to assist them if we get to a public inquiry. And I qualify that, Mr. Speaker, because it is a public inquiry, not a public hearing. Public inquiry where the two joint ERCB and PUB can make recommendations to us as a government that we can then deal with at that time.
To the Premier, why isn't the government prepared to sign a letter of intent with Southview Fibertech, subject to the plant meeting all existing environmental and electrical safety regulation, in order to get this project back on track?
Mr. Speaker, and the Honourable Minister has just said this already, but I'll say it again, the government is doing everything possible to help the proposers of this project. What they haven't done is come forward with the official requests. The government is trying to help them in every way possible. And I would love to see them push on and get it done. The minister has to call the meetings.
Red Deer South, followed by Edmonton Highlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Solicitor General. I know that all ministers were forced to make some very difficult decisions in adhering to the recent budget restraint, and I noted from the estimates that there was a reduction of permanent or full-time positions from 3,110 to 2,736, or a net reduction of 374 positions in his department. Now, I'm confident, Mr. Speaker, that the Solicitor General would not compromise the safety of Albertans, but will the Minister comment on the impact a reduction of 374 full-time positions in his department will have on security in the province's correctional centres, particularly on our maximum security facilities such as the Calgary Remand Centre?
Mr. Speaker, the Department actually takes quite a bit of pride in effecting the abolishment of 374 positions out of an overall 1,300 and some odd that the government has been able to reduce. But the real element of pride comes where we've only had to issue 15 layoff notices, and those resulted only because spouses couldn't accommodate transfers. When we were addressing this rationalization, we did assess the potential impact that this cutback would have on a satisfactory level of security, and we decided not to alter the staff configuration within security units or cell blocks, especially where there's supervision of prisoners. In Calgary, there's 224 positions. Only 6 were reduced. 4 came from management administration, 2 from the corrections officers' ranks. The highest security requirements do come from Calgary and from Edmonton, although I would not call them maximum security facilities because we don't have any of those under provincial jurisdiction. Those are federal jurisdictions.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Solicitor General. We are about to see the completion of the Red Deer Remand Centre, which was built in response to specific demand and need. I understand now that this facility will only be partially staffed and will be operating at only 50% of capacity. Would the Minister confirm the status of this needed facility?
Mr. Speaker, the Red Deer Remand Centre will be opening. I think the opening is scheduled for sometime in May. When it was in the planning stages, there was a far higher demand as a prison as well as a holding facility. We are opening it on a reduced manpower contingent and a reduced operating contingent. When the demand increases, we will increase the manpower and operational facility.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Solicitor General. Will the Minister advise the Assembly how these staff cuts will affect the inmate work programs, which provide hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of labour to Alberta Forestry, other government departments, and in particular to municipalities and non-profit organizations?
Mr. Speaker, the inmate work programs are important to the mental and physical condition of the inmates, as well as the honourable member has mentioned. it does provide a great deal of material service to non-profit groups, to municipalities and other government departments. These programs will continue in forestry camps, and there will be community work projects working from major institutions such as Calgary Institution, providing a number of projects for the Olympics.
Final supplementary to the Minister, Mr. Speaker. None of us appreciate lengthy delays or long lineups. Would the Minister advise this Assembly how these reductions will affect service to Albertans at motor vehicle offices?
Mr. Speaker, the Motor Vehicle Division staff contingent was reduced 51 positions. We're offsetting some of this decrease by employing the mail-in system of renewal of licenses. 28% of the renewals are done by mail-in. We have a monthly renewal as against a yearly renewal, which helps avoid the lineups. We are experimenting with a weekly renewal basis, as well as experimenting with a machine that would dispense the renewal tabs so that they can be accessed at off hours and during the evenings, and we hope that that will prove out to be successful.
Member for Athabasca Lac-La-Biche, followed by Calgary-Buffalo.
Supplementary to the Solicitor General, why was the successful Beaver Lake Native Correction Facility near Lac-La-Biche closed down in March, putting 7 Native workers on UIC? What was the rationale behind that?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware of the 7 Native workers going on UIC, but the Beaver Lake facility was rationalized with the Footner Lake facility, where we could deliver a more effective service without running the 2 camps together. The Footner Lake facility was much better condition and could be operated at a more economical rate than the Beaver Lake.
Calgary-Buffalo.
It's nice to see savings made by the cutting of 374 staff, but I'm wondering why the Minister would not increase staff in the juvenile institutions, particularly for psychologists and psychiatrists, in light of the inordinate degree of overcrowding that has taken place since the number of juveniles imprisoned has increased dramatically under the Young Offenders Act.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not so sure that there was a question there, but I wouldn't want the member to mislead the House that there's a severe overcrowding situation with young offenders facilities. There was, when we commenced this session approximately a year ago, such a problem. That has been overcome. We are constantly working with the mental health aspect of the young offender and have made great strides in that regard as well.
Edmonton Highlands, followed by Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question today is to the Minister for Advanced Education. Mr. Speaker, the Private Vocational Schools Act and its regulations are quite clear. Exaggerating claims about the value of courses offered, luring students to enroll in courses in a misleading fashion are forbidden, and competent instruction must be provided. I've raised with the Advanced Education Minister a number of concerns related to alleged breaches of these rules by the Computer Career Institute, and I'm not actually satisfied with his answers to date. I wonder if the Minister will now admit that his department has failed to exert proper control over this particular institute, such that it, CCI, has taken undue liberty with the regulations governing it.
Mr. Speaker, I think it would be premature to accept as fact the allegations made by the honourable member. Certainly there are situations, not only at that particular private vocational school, but at others that are under investigation from time to time, and the honourable member is quite correct insofar as government regulations are concerned respecting advertising or the return of tuition fees. With respect to the particular case to which she is referring, that is currently still under investigation. In my view, the proper process is being followed, and if it is appropriate, the department will step in as required by the regulations.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. It's actually more than one constituent. It's many disillusioned CCI students and former students who have been in touch with me alleging that they've been led down the garden path and that they've gone into debt for courses that aren't going to be recognized by the CGA or NAIT. And I wonder now if the minister is prepared to say if it's CCI, the institute, that's going to have to repay these people, if the department is going to refund the money to those students, this is the question, or if the students themselves are going to be left holding the bag. Will he tell us which way it's going to go?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the process that is followed is, in the case of a dispute, if it's brought to our attention, we try and get the school and the students together, and in most cases, whatever misunderstanding, whether it involves a refund or not, is usually resolved at that level. And that's the state we're at now with respect to the group of students the member refers to and the Computer Career Institute. If they are unable to resolve their disagreement, then certainly we're prepared to step in, whether it's tomorrow or next week or whenever we need to. Certainly there's a great deal of misunderstanding. The briefing I have received isn't clear as to whether or not the students believed they were getting something or whether they were told they were getting something. And it's going to take a little while to straighten that out, but Dr. Hendry and other officials in the department are working on it. We've also been after the entire system to clean up their advertising, because I think some of that has been perhaps misleading insofar as government financial support is concerned. What we're dealing with here this year, Mr. Speaker, is really just the tip of the iceberg. Enrollment in the private vocational schools has gone up in the past few years from 5,000 to 30,000, and we have presently pending another 120 applications for that many more private vocational schools. Certainly the capacity of the Student Finance Board to support that many students at that high tuition levels is not within our reach at this time. So the honourable member is quite correct in identifying a problem that is growing.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. On the advertising then, does the minister now recognize that, in fact, still in the newspapers and even at their open house, the Computer Career Institute is still riding on a government-sponsored program in order to lure people into other courses on what are allegedly misleading bases?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure whether the honourable member is referring to courses which are supported through the Department of Career Development or financial support which is given to all post-secondary students through the Student Finance Board, and it was the latter that we had been involved with. I'm not aware of any improper advertising with respect to the former.
Well, final supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I was referring to the career development employment programs, but remember that they are used in the context of alluring other students up to other programs. I wonder if the minister will now admit that the reason that he changed the regulations under this Act on May 15th of 1987 was in fact not to further ensure quality education for students at this and other such institutions, but in fact to widen the loophole so that they would legally be allowed to continue to do what they're doing.
Oh, absolutely not, Mr. Speaker. I referred to the growing size of the problem. To put it bluntly, there used to be people in the business of education, and now there are many groups that perceive education as a business. And that is going to change the rules, and it's going to require, I think, a greater degree of watching over by the government, and our department is prepared to do that and has started that. But getting back to conclude this matter with the original question raised by the member, had there been misleading information given to one or more students at the time of their enrollment, it's going to be very difficult to adjudicate. It's gotten down to a he said, they said kind of situation.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark, followed by Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm concerned about the fiscal management of this government and about the manner in which it sets its priorities. This government that can't find money for women's shelters, can't find money for community schools, can't find money to feed Calgary school children, spent at least $73 million more on government travel over the last 5 years than the government of BC. I'm directing my question to the Attorney General. Could the Attorney General please provide this House with justification for his travel, his trip to Naples, Florida on February 13th, 1987 to discuss free trade with Florida at about the time that it must have been 10 or 15 or 20 below in Edmonton?
The honourable member will be pleased to know that for the last 3 years, 2.5 years, I have been the co-chairman with the National Conference of State Legislative Leaders in the United States of a series of seminars dealing with matters of interest to legislators at the provincial government level in Canada and legislative leaders in the United States. The conference, which was held in Naples, Florida, had been arranged as part of that process, and I'm pleased to advise that the sister conference will be sponsored by British Columbia in July of this year to carry on with the discussions which took place in that seminar in Florida, which governments were represented from across Canada, including Quebec with a Liberal government, Ontario with a Liberal government, Manitoba with a new Democratic government, and of course Alberta and other provinces and the territories. These seminars and conferences which have been held have been extremely useful. I'm pleased as well to advise that Alberta hosted a conference of a similar nature on the subject of tourism at Banff in the fall of last year. And I intend fully, as Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, not as Attorney General, to continue to enhance and promote a good working relationship with legislative leaders in the United States of America and with legislative leaders in Canada.
It's always easy to find reasons to spend money, very difficult to find reasons not to spend money. Will the Attorney General please tell the House why it is that when he assumed responsibilities for the Departments of Advanced Education and later for the Department of FIGA, that his travel expenses doubled and tripled over those travel expenses incurred by his predecessors? What's going on here?
Honourable Minister, there's a difficulty because I can't deal with that aspect of the question dealing with the previous portfolio.
To set the matter straight, Mr. Speaker, my travel expenses, my predecessor lived in Edmonton. I live in Medicine Hat. I travel to and from my constituency every week. My family has not moved here, and I feel, Mr. Speaker, it is important to set the record straight that it is my intention to continue to live in Medicine Hat and to visit my family every weekend, and if he would have me do otherwise, well, I'm very sorry to hear that. My travel expenses, which are reported annually, include weekly travel between Medicine Hat and Edmonton. That is one of the major reasons for an increase in expenditure on my travel, and I think it would be entirely improper for me to abandon my family.
Perhaps the, $100 a week is hardly a significant portion.
Please. Order, please, honourable member. Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Chair hears a no. The time for question period has expired. However, It didn't really sound like post-World War I, but it was almost like singing over there, over there. The chair recognizes points of order from Westlock Sturgeon, Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, my point of order is simple. You called me out of order, and I just wanted to know what reason, what you base that on. It's not a question of a point of order. It's just to find out why I was called out of order.
On this particular occasion, the member for Westlock Sturgeon was called out of order, and by now reading the various citations, there will be no discussion of the points of order on this particular aspect. But the point of the citation to be given is really Beauchesne 359, subsection 7. A question must adhere to the proprieties of the House in terms of inferences, imputing motives, or casting aspersions upon persons within the House or out of it. That also relates with regard to Standing Order 23L, which a member shall be called to order by Mr. Speaker if that member introduces any matter in debate which, in the opinion of Mr. Speaker, offends the practices and precedents of the Assembly. And with due respect to the honourable member, while indeed the member did cite a fact which was the case before the Premier took office, the matter of trying to impute guilt or any other kind of false motive by innuendo is really not a feature of the parliamentary traditions of this legislature. And as for that, the matter of statements of holdings have been duly filed with the Legislative Assembly office by all members of the Assembly. Chair recognizes Edmonton Meadowlark. I'm sorry, honourable member. That isn't the way the place functions. Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. As I rose to ask my third supplementary and I began to speak, it was then that the bell went and you rose and said, ask for permission of the House to continue. The practice in this House has always been that once a member is speaking, they are able to finish their talk and get their question out or get their answer out before you ask to continue the question period. I still believe, therefore, that I have one question at least left, and if we ask that question again, perhaps the courtesy of this government backbench would be to allow me to continue in discussing an extremely important expenditure matter on a government that has a great deal of difficulty in setting priorities fairly in this province. Thank you.
Thank you, honourable member. You do indeed state what is the general practice of the House, but it is not the exclusive practice of the House. There have been other occasions. Honourable member. Honourable member, the chair was indeed expressing its sympathy for your position, but nevertheless, the practice of the House is to request unanimous consent. The House is not bound to give unanimous consent, and therefore on this day you failed. But I'm quite certain that the member will be back for a few more days of dialogue and opportunity in terms of question period. Orders of the day. First, I wonder if